Hello and welcome to Unacademy IAS English, a one-stop destination for the English medium civil services aspirants. A very good morning and welcome to the daily Hindu news analysis. Before we start, let me wish everyone a happy Christmas and as well as a very happy New Year as we enter 2025. So before we begin, let's take a look at the topics that we are going to discuss. Today I have picked 8 important articles from the Delhi edition of the Hindu newspaper. So let's take up all these topics for a comprehensive discussion and analysis so that you don't have to go back and read the newspaper again. If you guys are benefiting from our initiative, do support us with your likes and comments and don't forget to subscribe to our channel. Now before we start, Unacademy is providing you a Christmas gift. Unacademy is all set to conduct the last Civil Services Championship Test of 2024. See, for UPSC aspirants, especially for those who are preparing for the upcoming prelims exam or even for 2026, it's very important to get as much practice as possible with regard to the prelims exam. Not only to revise your topics and master your concepts, but even to develop the strategies that are needed that you need to employ in the prelims exam. So a scholarship test like this would give you that perfect opportunity to attempt a full-length question paper, both the GS paper and the CSAT paper. So on 29th December at 11 a.m. and 5 p.m., Unacademy is conducting the last Civil Services Championship Test of 2024. And the best part is that apart from getting enough practice for the prelims exam, you'll also stand to win attractive scholarships and rewards. Up to 90% scholarship on our IAS courses with some attractive rewards. So do register immediately by using the link provided in the video description. The scholarship that you're going to get would help you join our IAS course, the English Medium Ignite batch, which has just started. And if you apply the code IAS English, you stand to get more benefits. So when you enroll for the program, don't forget to use the code IAS English. So with this, let's get started and look at this important topic. Today, we have multiple articles related to this particular issue on page 1, 12, and 14. So let's merge all these articles together and hold a comprehensive discussion. Let's go beyond the article as well. These articles are dealing with the recent amendment that was done to the Conduct of Election Rules, 1961. Recently, the Government of India notified an amendment to the Conduct of Election Rules 1961. This amendment has triggered a major controversy. It has faced strong opposition from the political parties and as well as from the civil society and the activists. The Election Commission of India and the government, they have strongly defended the amendment. So let's dive deep into this topic and understand what is this amendment that was done to the Conduct of Election Rules? What's the controversy all about? See, under Conduct of Election Rules, the Election Commission of India, under the Conduct of Election Rules, the Election Commission of India essentially conducts the elections to the Parliament and the state assemblies, which would be in line with the provisions of the Representation of People Act. It essentially lays down a set of guidelines, a set of rules to be followed by the election officials in the process of conducting elections. Now, as you all know, in a democracy, the very test of a true democracy is whether there are free and fair elections, whether there is transparency in the election process, whether there is accountability for any misgivings or any mistakes that might be committed in the electoral process. So it's very essential for the Election Commission to not only conduct the election in a free and fair manner, but also to provide access to certain documents and records so that the public, the candidates, they can keep a check on the electoral process, ensure that there is no rigging of the election or there is no mishandling of the electoral process. So this is very, very essential to protect the integrity of the electoral process itself. So under Conduct of Election Rules, there is a rule number 93. Rule number 93 of Conduct of Election Rules is almost like the Right to Information Act. Under this rule, the public has a right to seek any record, any paper related to the election, in order to check whether the electoral rules are being followed, whether the laid down guidelines are being followed, and this essentially secured right to information for the common public. So voters at any point, they could approach the Election Commission and demand such records and papers related to the electoral process. Let's say a recent election has happened. The public could approach the Election Commission and, as per the provisions of Rule 93 under Conduct of Election Rules, they could demand these papers and records to check and verify whether the electoral process was held in a free and fair manner. So this was seen as a vital tool to ensure the fairness of the process, to bring transparency into the election system. But now the government has brought about a change. So let's understand why the change has been brought about. What exactly is the change and how does it create a controversy? Now recently in Haryana, state assembly elections were conducted. So following the elections, an individual from the common public had filed a petition at the Election Commission asking for CCTV footage and as well as the videos from the polling booths. See, previously, as part of the records and papers related to the election, which the public could demand from Election Commission, even CCTV footage from the polling stations and any video records that are maintained could also be sought by the public as well. Not only by the candidates or contesting and the representatives of the candidates, even the common public, let's say a journalist or an activist, even they could approach the Election Commission, ask for not just certain records and papers, but even for CCTV footage and videos concerning to the polling booths. And Election Commission would often oblige with these requests. Now recently in the Haryana elections, the CCTV footage and video recordings were denied to this particular individual who had demanded these records. He filed a petition and approached the Punjab and Haryana High Court, which took up the matter and ordered the Election Commission to share the CCTV footage and the video recordings of the polling station. Now, following this order of the High Court, the Election Commission of India immediately recommended to the Government of India that we need to amend Rule 93. We need to amend the Conduct of Election Rules, specifically Rule 93. So, as per the recommendation of Election Commission of India, the Ministry of Law and Justice has carried out the amendment and notified the change as well. So, what is this change? As per the new amendment, going forward, CCTV footage and videos related to the polling booth will not be available to the public. The amendment basically states that only those material which are specified in the rules, specified under these rules, will be made accessible to the common public. And if you look at what is specified, it only mentions other records, papers, etc. and it explicitly leaves out CCTV footage and video recordings of polling station. So Election Commission, following the order of the High Court, has tried to subvert the right of the public, their right to information essentially, where they could seek CCTV recordings and video footage before, but now it is not going to be possible because of this amendment. So this is where the controversy comes up. Since it's a highly controversial topic, let's look at both sides of the argument. Let's see why Election Commission believes that this amendment was necessary. Let's look at the defense offered by the Government of India in favor of this amendment. Let's also look at the criticism that's coming in from the opposition and from the activists. See, the Election Commission and as well as the Government of India, they strongly believe that CCTV footage and as well as video recordings could be easily misused to create a false narrative after the elections are over. See, Election Commission and government are saying that candidates still have access to CCTV footage and videos. Those who contest the elections, the representatives of the candidates, they can still ask for CCTV footage along with other records and papers to ensure that the transparency is maintained in the process. It's being denied only to the common public. The new amendment, which has been done, it denies access to CCTV footage and video recordings only to the common public, not to the candidates. So Election Commission and Government of India are stating that it doesn't compromise the integrity of the election process. It doesn't compromise right to information or electoral freedom, because candidates and their representatives, they still have access not only to all the records and papers, right, which is used as part of the electoral process, but even the CCTV footage and video recordings at the polling station. So they can check and ensure that there has been no attempt to rig the election. So the change affects primarily public's access to CCTV footage and video recordings. So Government of India and Election Commission say that when such footage is released in the public domain, when it's given as a right to information, there is a lot of potential to be misused, especially in the era of deep fakes. What if miscreants or vested interests, they doctor the video, they edit the video in such a way that they will try to claim that the elections were rigged. They will try to create a false narrative which could threaten the electoral process, which could raise unnecessary questions about the integrity of the electoral process itself. So to avoid such misuse of electronic footage and videos, the Election Commission and the government strongly believe that it should not be shared with the public. Hence, it is being put on under a restrictive list. Whereas other records and papers would continue to remain available to the public. Whereas all records and papers, including CCTV footage, electronic data and video footage, would be available to the candidates and their representatives. This is the argument of the Election Commission and Government of India, that these videos might be misused to later allege that electoral fraud has been committed or elections have been rigged by doctoring those videos using deep fake AI technology. So the point being raised with the government and the Election Commission is quite valid, that there is a possibility that such footage and recordings could be potentially misused. It could be doctored. But however, of late, there is a disturbing development in our elections. In some of the recent elections that have happened, there is a controversy which has come up with regard to voter turnout. I'm sure you're aware that Election Commission of India keeps releasing regular updates on election day regarding the voter turnout. You might have seen news reports almost every hour. They keep telling you what percentage of voters have come and cast their vote. This voter turnout data is recorded by the presiding officers at the polling booth. They issue these tokens or slips, right? Those who have voted, I'm sure you would know that once you enter the polling station, you receive a slip from the presiding officer, right? And the details are entered. So this data is regularly updated. That is how Election Commission gets a clear picture of what is the voter turnout. This number will keep on increasing as the voting day progresses. Now, at the end of polling, there is one data which is released when polling comes to an end in the evening. There is one data which is released which gives an initial estimate. It gives you an initial estimate of the total voter turnout. But later, Election Commission will bring out the final estimate. Now, historically, when you look at the difference between the initial estimate and the final estimate, it was never a huge difference. But of late, in some recent elections, especially in some constituencies, at certain polling booths, there is an abnormal increase in the initial estimate and the final estimate of the voter turnout. This is where a controversy has come up. Opposition parties are questioning, how can the final voter turnout jump so significantly? Yes, there might be a small change, because even when polling is about to close, there might be a lot of voters who might come in at the last minute. They might be standing in the queue. Maybe those details are still not recorded by the presiding officer. So when final estimates are calculated, maybe there is a slight jump, a small percentage jump. But how can it be a significant jump? In the last few minutes of the voting, how can there be such a big jump in specific constituencies and polling stations? This has been a controversy, and there are allegations whether attempts are being made to rig the elections at certain constituencies and polling booths. Election Commission denies these allegations. It denies these claims. Election Commission has said there will be a difference between initial estimate and the final estimate. As a lot of voters come in at the last minute, there is a rush, plus there is a long queue. These voters are not accounted in the initial estimate. Only when final estimates are calculated, only then we get the real picture, the complete picture. That's why we are seeing a big jump in voter turnout. That's the defense of the Election Commission. But opposition parties are not satisfied. Activists are not satisfied. They want to check CCTV footage and video recordings from the polling booth. At the polling station, there will be CCTV cameras. They can check how long was the queue, how many voters came in at the last minute, right when the voting was closing, and how many cast their vote, so that they can cross-check with the estimates given by the Election Commission and ensure that there is no attempt to manipulate the election. So this is where the public, the activists and opposition parties are raising a concern. Why is Election Commission not giving access to CCTV footage and video recordings to the common public? Now see, I'll repeat this point. Candidates will still have access. Candidates who are contesting the election, they will still have access to all CCTV footage and video recordings, along with all the papers and documents. The register which is maintained by the presiding officer, where all the entries are made, the slips that are issued, all those papers along with CCTV footage and videos are available to candidates. The amendment which has been done only denies CCTV footage and any digital evidence to the public, because Election Commission fears that this data will be later manipulated and misused to blame the Election Commission for failing to conduct the elections in a free and fair manner. But the activists and the opposition, they are questioning what is the reason to deny the CCTV footage and video recordings, because this would be a very helpful tool, especially in certain polling booths where there's a major jump from the initial to final estimates. The public and activists, they can cross-check across the country whether the numbers which have changed at the last minute, is it genuine? Whether those many voters came in at the last minute and did they really cast their vote? So this is seen as an integral part of right to information and electoral freedom, to ensure the transparency of the electoral process, to hold the Election Commission accountable. But Election Commission also has a counterpoint to this. Election Commission says voter secrecy is as important as right to information and electoral freedom. Right? Ensuring the secrecy of your ballot is equally important. Election Commission argues that CCTV and video footage could be misused to identify certain voters, maybe figure out in which way they voted, and later maybe they will be targeted by the political parties, the candidates maybe. So this might lead to profiling of the voters. So voter secrecy might be compromised as per the Election Commission. So this is where the controversy comes up. The opposition has even approached the Supreme Court. The Congress party has already moved the Supreme Court over this amendment, challenging the legality, the constitutionality of the amendment that has been done to the conduct of election rules. If you look at transparency activists and the civil society, even they are critical of these changes. They are arguing that CCTV camera footage from polling stations was very crucial to cross-check and verify the actual voter turnout. So by denying this to the public, the Election Commission is raising a question about the very integrity of the process itself. And also questions are being raised as to why the amendment was done now, after the High Court order was issued. So this is where the controversy comes up, but the government is defending its position, saying that such footage might be misused, it might be doctored to create a false narrative which might affect the faith in the electoral process. Plus, it might compromise voter secrecy. So let's leave the topic over here. Let's not judge whether what has been done is right or wrong, because the court will be looking into this, the Supreme Court. And since it's a highly divisive, controversial topic, let's wait for the Supreme Court's judgment, as Congress has already moved the Supreme Court over this particular question. Now take up this practice question for your mains exam. Why is there opposition against the recent amendments done to the conduct of election rules 1961? Discuss. So please use the points, the structure that we followed in the discussion. Try to build a good answer for this question and try to post those answers in the comment section. Now let's move on to the next article. We have a very interesting article today on page 14 that focuses on quantum computing. See, recently in the quantum world, there was a massive development. the company Google brought out a new quantum processor, Willow. I'm sure many of you would be aware, Google held a big event to announce the launch of a new quantum chip, a new quantum processor called Willow, which is said to have enormous capabilities to solve complex problems and equations. Google has claimed that this quantum chip can easily solve complex problems in just minutes, which would take trillions and trillions of years for classical computers to solve. Even if you take the fastest supercomputer that is available today in the world, right? Those fastest supercomputers might take trillions and trillions of years to solve certain complex problems and equations. So with Google's Willow quantum chip, these problems could be potentially cracked in just minutes. So this highlights the enormous potential of quantum computing. So let's understand what is quantum computing. How are quantum computers different from your classical computers? So let's understand the science behind it, the tech behind it. Let's also talk about the challenges with regard to quantum computing. Of course, any super speed computing at the scale of quantum computing will have major applications. It can revolutionize the industry. In fact, quantum computing is seen as one of the critical emerging technologies, which has strategic geopolitical implications. So, computing at such great speeds, it can transform every single industry, our day-to-day life. So, it has enormous applications, numerous advantages, numerous benefits for the economy, for the society. At the same time, any revolutionary technology, if it's in the wrong hands, if it can be misused, it will have dangerous consequences as well. Right? As we have seen with, let's say, nuclear technology or AI or social media, any revolutionary tech will have enormous applications, benefits, and advantages. But the same technology, if it's in the wrong hands and if it's employed for the wrong purposes, it can have deadly consequences. Right? Not just for security of countries, but even for the society, the civilization itself. So let's first understand what exactly are these quantum computers? How are they different from classical computers? Now, this is a possible question. UPSC might ask you in mains to differentiate between classical and quantum computers, or maybe a straightforward prelims question as well. See, in classical computers, you take a processor, for example, that runs your basic computing device, or you take supercomputers, for example. The processors, essentially, they operate in bits, right? Each bit can have one of the two states possible, which is either a 0 or 1. In the digital world, data is handled through zeros and ones, through these binaries, right? And every bit, which is part of the processor in a classical computer, each bit can have just one state at a given point in time. At a certain point in time, a bit can either hold 0 or it can hold 1. It can't hold both at the same time. It's either 0 or 1. Only two states are possible here. Now, when I compare this with a quantum computer, the quantum computer employs something known as qubits. And a qubit can potentially hold 0 and 1 simultaneously. It can be both 0 and 1 at the same given point in time. Or it can be partly 0, partly 1 at the same point in time. Now, this is where the processing capability of a qubit, of a quantum processor, becomes significantly higher compared to your classical computers and classical processors. Now, to understand this concept further, we should dive a little deeper into the quantum world. It's a very complex concept, but there are two basic concepts we need to learn. How come a qubit can hold two binaries at the same time? How can it have two states at a given point in time? Because our traditional understanding of physics, right, teaches us that at any point in time, there can be only one state. How can there be two states at the same point in time? That is what we need to learn. That is what we need to understand. So to understand this, we have to learn two concepts: quantum superposition, quantum entanglement. These two basic concepts will help you understand why quantum computers are so fast. How are they so fast? They're several times faster than your classical computers. So you can understand that by just understanding superposition and entanglement. Now, what exactly is superposition? Superposition is nothing but the ability of a qubit to exist in two states simultaneously. The ability of a qubit to exist in two states simultaneously, to hold both 0 and 1 at the same time. Again, if it's still confusing, we should take one of the most popular, renowned examples in the quantum world to break down quantum mechanics, which is Schrodinger's cat. Erwin Schrödinger used this thought experiment when he was discussing the quantum idea with Albert Einstein to highlight the complexities of quantum mechanics and to simplify the understanding of quantum mechanics. So according to this thought experiment developed by Erwin Schrödinger, you need to imagine a cat which is placed inside a box. Now, if you're an observer standing outside the box, you don't know what's happening inside the box. So you place a cat inside the box and there is a radioactive material which may or may not decay. There is a radioactive material placed next to the cat which may decay or may not decay. So if it decays, the radioactivity goes up. There will be a Geiger counter to measure the increase in radioactivity. So if the decay is detected, this system will release a hammer. Essentially, it's a sensor-triggered system. If the radioactivity goes up in the Geiger counter, crosses a certain threshold, it releases a hammer that will break the vial of poison that has been placed over here. Once the vial of poison breaks, obviously the cat is going to die. But if the radioactive material does not decay, then the Geiger counter will not detect any changes in radioactivity levels. The hammer will not hit the vial of flask, the poison flask. The poison will not leak out, so cat will live. These are the two states possible. Now, for an outside observer, we don't know whether this radioactive material is decaying or not. So, for the observer from the outside, the cat is both dead and alive at the same time. This basically is superposition, where two states can exist simultaneously, and this is possible only in the quantum world. Any fans of Ant-Man, right, would also easily understand the concept, because in this Marvel movie as well, right, there is a very good depiction of the concept. Though it's completely fictional, the concept of the quantum world is very, very well depicted. It's scientifically as accurate as possible. So Schrodinger's thought experiment, the Schrodinger's cat, is the best way to understand superposition. So the cat here can be both dead or alive at the same time, right? So this is superposition. Now this is something that the Copenhagen interpretation agreed with. All the top physicists of that era, Niels Bohr and others, right, who are part of the Copenhagen interpretation, this is what they concurred, that in a state of superposition in the quantum world, in quantum physics, it is possible to have two states simultaneously. Now, what exactly is entanglement? Quantum entanglement basically refers to, let's say, two qubits which are far away physically. Physically, they are separated. But if you can measure one qubit and understand the state of this qubit, you can automatically get to know what is the state of the other qubit. You don't even have to look at the other qubit. So irrespective of the physical distance separating these two qubits, right, by looking at the state, by measuring the state of one, you will automatically get to know what is the state of the other. This significantly reduces the time involved in processing. That's where the speed comes in, right? Superposition also plays a role, as multiple states can be held by the same qubit at the same time. And since the physical distance doesn't matter here, by looking at the state of one qubit, you can easily determine what's the other state, right? You'll get to know. And this basically reduces the processing time and speeds up the processing. Now, to understand entanglement, again, I think you'll need an example, right? Now, let's say there are two gloves, a glove for your right arm and a glove for your left arm. Let's say I place the left glove in one city. I place the right glove in another city, and both are contained in a box. All right. Now, if I open this box containing the left glove and take a look at this glove, I'll get to know it's a glove for the left palm, right? Because of the certain design which it follows to suit the left side of the left orientation of your palm. Now you tell me, should I open the second box, which is in another city, to know whether it's a right glove or a left glove? Since there were only two gloves to begin with, a right and a left, now that I know that there is a left glove in this box, automatically immediately I know that the other glove, the right glove, is in the other box. I need not open and check that. I need not go to the other city, open and check that, right? So this is entanglement. It essentially postulates that in the quantum world, the qubits are entangled, irrespective of the physical distance. There is an inherent nature here. When you measure the state of one, automatically you will get to know what is the state of the other. So superposition and entanglement is what adds this beauty to the quantum world. That is what gives this enormous capability as far as quantum computing is concerned. Now let's see what progress have we made when it comes to quantum computers. IBM, one of the pioneers in quantum computing, in 2019, it developed a circuit-based commercial quantum computer known as Q System 1. It was considered to be one of the fastest computers at that point. A circuit-based quantum system was developed called Q System 1. But the bigger progress has been seen from Google. Google has been making rapid advances, right? The parent company Alphabet has invested heavily in quantum research and design and in development of all the associated materials and technologies. So in 2019, Google came out with the Sycamore processor that achieved quantum supremacy. This processor, the Sycamore processor, it was set to perform complex mathematical functions in just 200 seconds, which would have taken 10,000 years for the fastest supercomputer to perform. If you take the fastest supercomputer in 2019 and give this equation to solve, the fastest supercomputer in the world would have taken 10,000 years. But the Sycamore processor, a quantum processor, would solve the same in just 200 seconds. That is the speed, the scale at which quantum computing works. Now, the recent Willow processor that Google has brought out, right? This can finish the most complex problems in just 5 minutes, which would take the fastest supercomputer today at least 10 trillion years, septillion years. The fastest supercomputer in the world today would take 10 trillion years, whereas Willow processor can solve that in 5 minutes. So this is the radical potential that is created by quantum computing. So you can envision the kind of applications it can bring about, from defense to space technology to all industrial processes. Everything could be revolutionized, be it drug testing or drug discovery, where supercomputers are employed, or weather forecasting, for example. Our weather forecasting models are heavily dependent on supercomputers and fast processing of data. Many times weather forecasting goes wrong because computers are not able to match the enormous volume of data that they're being fed with. So quantum computers can solve these problems, provide for major advances in every field, in every industry and sector, and it can change your day-to-day life. It can change the very face of the planet. But however, there are challenges. There are significant challenges. It's not as easy as it is being projected. First of all, the quantum world is highly complex. I think by now you would have realized that. If we need thought experiments and different analogies to understand even these basic concepts, right? It is indeed a complex world. So it requires enormous investments. It's a very, very expensive technology to carry out research, design, development, to produce the required materials. It involves very delicate fabrication of certain superconductors and the fabrication of the chips. It's a very complex, expensive exercise. It's highly cost prohibitive. That's why very few countries in the world are pursuing quantum research, and India is one of them. US, China, of course, along with few major powers like France, Russia, then India. All these countries are leading quantum research, but India is still many miles behind when it comes to, let's say, US or China. So US and China are seen as the global leaders in the quantum world, whereas India also has taken some baby steps. The cost involved, the complexity involved makes this field very, very challenging, and it might even limit the practical applications. And also, there are other scientific problems. In the quantum world, qubits are not stable. It's very difficult, almost impossible as of now, to maintain qubits in a stable position, because the superposition state, it breaks easily when outside noise interferes with the qubit. The ability of a qubit to hold two states simultaneously, that gets broken very easily when outside noise interferes with the qubit. So maintaining that stability of the qubit, that too millions of qubits are needed. If you need a effective processor, let's say for real world application, real world industrial scientific application, you need millions of qubits. The big question right now, the big scientific challenge is how will you maintain the stability of millions and millions of qubits? See, right now, whatever research is happening, for example, if you take in India, the goal is to develop a quantum computer with qubits, with just around 52,000 qubits. Maintaining stability of 52,000 qubits itself is a huge challenge. That is our initial target in India, to develop a quantum computer which has just 52,000 qubits. Imagine having millions of qubits where maintaining stability is a big challenge. So there are many, many practical, scientific and economic challenges that are present. And also the potential for misuse. See, today data safety, data privacy, our security, digital security is entirely based on encryption. Right? Digital security, data privacy is entirely based on encryption technology. As of now, classical computers, they can't easily crack encryption. Encryption is basically a set of mathematical equations. You solve the set of mathematical equations, then you'll get the key, the password, essentially. Now, let's say there is a hacker or a cyber criminal organization or a country trying to wage cyber war or carry out cyber espionage. They want to break into certain locked accounts. So now guessing the password is almost near impossible because of high levels of encryption, where classical computers will take thousands of years or millions of years to solve the problem, which means practically they can never get the password to hack into the accounts. But with quantum computing, this becomes possible, right? The speed at which quantum computers can solve problems and equations, they can easily break the toughest encryption standards that are available today, that are known to mankind. So hacking into accounts will become child's play. At the press of a button, right, one can have access to all possible passwords and break the basic feature of cyber safety and digital safety and privacy. So those who will possess such technology will obviously become enormously powerful with direct security and geopolitical implications. There's something called Shor's algorithm. Peter Shor is credited with developing this algorithm that can help crack the factors of large numbers. Large number factorization is what is needed to crack today's encryption. And quantum computers, for them, it's just a cakewalk. They'll easily break the current encryption standards, right? They can employ Shor's algorithm and use that to quickly identify the factors of large numbers, thus solve these complex mathematical problems and equations in seconds, in minutes, which otherwise would take thousands or millions of years for classical computers. So no account, no digital system or record would be safe in a quantum era. Current encryption will not work, right? A different form of encryption would be needed to ensure safety and privacy. Current encryption standards will be outdated. So there is great potential to misuse such technologies as well. So coming to India. Now India also has entered the quantum race. Last year in 2023, Government of India launched the National Quantum Mission. 6,000 crores has been allocated by the government to the Department of Science and Technology. It's being implemented under the Department of Science and Technology. With a budget of 6,000 crores, the goal is to develop the essential technologies and processes that are needed to place India on the quantum map. The target is to develop quantum computers with 50 to 1,000 qubits in the next 8 years. So you can imagine how complex, how intensive the exercise must be. There is also a target to develop satellite-based secure quantum communication, to use quantum communication for enhanced security, to set up long-distance intercity communication and distribution over large distances, where instantaneous communication becomes much more easier, safer over long distances, and also develop the required material, develop magnetometers, the high sensitivity magnetometers which are used in atomic clocks that brings precision in communication and navigation today. Develop the fabrication technology for producing quantum chips. So under the mission, there are 4 thematic hubs that are going to be set up in key research institutions in the country. At the top research and academic institutions in the country, 4 thematic hubs will be created, focusing on quantum computing, quantum communication. So quantum communication will not only employ quantum methods for communication, it will also focus on securing the communication, developing new encryption standards, because current encryption will be outdated. Then a hub on quantum sensing and meteorology, how quantum mechanics can be employed for improving meteorological sciences, weather forecasting, and a hub on quantum materials and devices, essentially the chip fabrication and the production of these materials and devices. So these 4 hubs will be set up in key research institutions that will focus on these targets that are laid down under the National Quantum Mission. Even Niti Aayog is closely involved in driving this initiative with Department of Science and Technology. So based on this topic, what kind of question can be asked? So this is a basic question that you can anticipate. What is quantum computing? Illustrate how quantum computers are going to be faster than classical computers, where you have to talk about superposition and entanglement. Explain how they are different from classical computers, why they are so fast. What challenges are present ahead with regard to development of this technology, the complex nature of the domain, the cost, the high cost, plus the lack of stability of qubits. All these challenges have to be discussed. Then you should also discuss the potential misuse, right? Then finally, what measures or initiative has India taken? Discuss about the National Quantum Mission. Provide some basic points that will complete your answer. Let's move on to the next article. On page 12, we have a column written by Sudhindra Kulkarni. Sudhindra Kulkarni was a very close aide and advisor to former Prime Minister Atal Bihari Vajpayee in the PMO, in the Prime Minister's office. So based on his expertise in the PMO, Sudhindra Kulkarni has some prior experience and knowledge on handling India-China relations. So the writer is exploring the current state of India-China relations, the recent developments that have occurred, and providing a very interesting argument which can be actually very useful for our exams. So let's take a look at what the writer is pointing out. As all of you know, India-China were locked in a tense clash in Ladakh for 4 years, from 2020 to 2024. China carried out multiple incursions in eastern Ladakh, at Galwan River Valley, at Panongso Lake, at Hot Springs, Demchok, and Daulat Beg Oldi. Multiple incursions were carried out back in 2020 when the whole world was dealing with the pandemic. China created a major security threat, which was a breach of India's sovereignty. China had violated the previous boundary agreements, the 1993 Peace and Tranquility Agreement, the 1996 Agreement on Confidence Building Measures, the 2013 Agreement on Border Defense and Cooperation. So all these border agreements were breached by China. The previous commitments were breached when China carried out this escalation. This led to a major military standoff as India countered the Chinese mobilization, and eventually it resulted in a deadly clash at Galwan. 20 Indian soldiers were martyred and several PLA soldiers were also killed in hand-to-hand combat that broke out between Indian and Chinese troops during these military tensions in Ladakh. So since then, both countries made many attempts to bring back normalcy, to resolve this a standoff, and both the sides, they reactivated their established boundary agreements and the protocols under it to restart the boundary talks. Under the 93 and 96 agreement, there are standard protocols created which allows military commanders to talk to each other to resolve these issues, minor disputes and issues at the local level without allowing a small issue to escalate into a bigger conflict. The very purpose of the 1993 Peace and Tranquility Agreement along LAC was to prevent a small incursion from turning into a bigger war or a conflict. 1996 Agreement on Confidence Building Measures was designed to build trust on both the sides, provide for better communication to avoid misunderstandings, provide for direct channels of talks so the local and senior military commanders can directly engage with each other and find local resolutions and solutions to any small problem without allowing this to escalate to the higher levels. So these mechanisms were reactivated and many rounds of talks were held between military commanders. By 2022-23, the standoff at some places was resolved. At Galwan Valley, Hot Springs and Panong So, the standoffs here were resolved. Both sides decided to disengage and de-escalate. But at two locations, the standoff continued until a few days ago, at Demchok and at Depsang Plain. At these two flashpoints, the standoff continued until 2024. And recently, India-China announced a resolution of this issue as well at Kazan during the BRICS summit. During the recent BRICS summit hosted by Russia in the city of Kazan, Prime Minister Modi and Chinese President Xi Jinping, they both announced the resolution of these last flashpoints at Demchok and Depsang Plains. And this marks the return of some kind of normalcy in the relationship. So these are the recent developments which have happened. So the writer is pointing out that it takes mature leadership, which has been shown by Prime Minister Modi, Xi Jinping, to avoid minor issues and tensions from turning into a bigger conflict. Because generally, countries which are hostile to each other, countries which have a history of enmity, conflict and disputes, if there is no mature leadership in both the countries, they might carry out unnecessary escalations, turn even minor issues into a bigger conflict, which could even potentially turn into war. Now, that is the last thing that India-China want, especially for India. Though China's intentions are still suspect, that is the last thing India wants, a conflict with China. So the writer appreciates the leadership of both India and China, specifically the Prime Minister and the Chinese Premier, for showing the maturity that is needed to not allow these disputes and standoffs to turn into a bigger conflict. Now, the writer here is providing some advice to both India and China, which I find to be very relevant. The writer says that it's important for both India and China to follow the path of idealism if they have to maintain a cordial relationship. See, in the world of international relations, in the world of geopolitics, there are two schools of thought, primarily. In political science and international relations, there are two opposing schools of thought. The idealist school of thought and the realist school of thought. Those who are idealists, the proponents of idealism, they believe that you should uphold values, principles, ethics, morality, and your foreign policy should be driven based on these idealistic principles and goals. But on the other hand, the realists, they are pragmatists. They believe in a pragmatic policy. The realist school of thought, the proponents of realism, they support a policy of realpolitik, which was popularized by the likes of Henry Kissinger, or something similar was propounded by various thinkers and philosophers as well, from Kautilya to Machiavelli. So those who are realists, they believe that at any cost, even at the cost of compromising on ideals, values, principles, you should pursue your cold-hearted national interest, self-interest. You should be pragmatic and follow only realpolitik. Ensure your strategic concerns are addressed, your interests are protected, no matter what is the cost you're paying for it. So that is largely the realist school of thought. So according to the writer, both countries should stay away from the realist path. If they adopt realpolitik, right? If they show that selfishness and if they ignore the principles of idealism, then the chances of war or conflict between India and China increases significantly. Because there are many advocates of realism, both in India and China. Essentially the conservatives, the hawks. In India, there is always a propaganda that China is a serious enemy for India, an immediate threat for India. In China as well, there is a lot of misunderstanding about India. So within the leadership, within the strategic establishment, there are conservatives and hawks who are realists, who are pragmatic, who might be pushing both countries on the path of conflict. So to avoid that conflict, you need mature leadership, as it has been shown by Prime Minister Modi and Premier Xi Jinping. The writer is strongly advising the leadership to stay away from the cynic those who follow realpolitik, to stay away from realism and realists and be idealistic here. Respect the great Indian and Chinese civilizations, which have been interconnected for more than 2000 years. We have a rich civilizational history, right? One just needs to be reminded of the friendly ties in historical times between the civilizations and empires in India and China. Take, for example, how the Cholas from southern India had built a very cordial, friendly relationship with the Song dynasty of China through South China Sea and Malacca Strait. They were not only trading with each other, they even had very strong diplomatic relations, naval cooperation. They were even countering piracy together in Malacca Strait. They would even share naval technology, shipbuilding technology with each other. So there is a history of collaboration between Indians and Chinese. So the problems of the modern world, right, the post 1947 world, it has led to an interpretation that India-China will eventually be rivals, right? There's no other option. As two large Asian powers, it's largely assumed that India-China will be at conflict, that both countries can never accommodate each other. But there are others who have a contrarian view. Take, for example, former Prime Minister Manmohan Singh. He once famously said that the world is large enough to accommodate the rise of both India and China, which basically meant India-China need not fight. We are not competing for the same space. The world has enough space to accommodate the interests, the concerns of both India and China. And don't forget, we both are from global south, as developing fast emerging economies and major global powers. It's only natural for us to work together, provided if both of us respect idealism, respect the principles that have historically guided our relations. So the writer is offering some suggestions to avoid possible flashpoints and clashes. See, the first suggestion is definitely for China, as China happens to be an aggressive expansionist state. The People's Republic of China, led by the Communist Party, inspired by the ideology of Mao Zedong, has been inherently expansionist, aggressive, and even violent against its rivals and neighbors. This is something which we have clearly noticed since 1949, since PRC was formed. So the writer first suggests that China should stop the unnecessary bullying, the unnecessary aggression that it shows often in diplomacy. The writer is suggesting that China should respect the integrity of the borders with India. It should assure India that it doesn't pose a security threat, not just now, but in the future as well. China should give a commitment to India that it will never ever threaten India's sovereignty and integrity, which is very essential to restore confidence in the relationship. The writer is also suggesting that China should find opportunities with India to collaborate, to work, reassure the other side. Then he also offers few suggestions for India. He's suggesting that India should not trigger China as well, unnecessarily. The writer takes a stand against the Quad grouping. He says the Quad grouping has done harm to India's relations with China and India's position in Asia. Because by joining the Quad with US, Japan, and Australia, it appears as if India has aligned with the Western countries, the Western narrative that China is some sort of super villain. China looks at Quad as Asian NATO. It has been heavily critical of the containment strategy of the US. Ever since the US adopted the pivot to Asia policy in 2009 under President Obama, since then US has stepped up its containment efforts. through diplomatic methods, military methods, covert intelligence operations, even cyber warfare. US has been trying to contain China in the Indo-Pacific. It has backed countries like Philippines and others. It has worked with Japan and Australia to directly pose an economic and strategic threat to Chinese interests. So the writer says India need not fall into this trap. We need not fall into the bracket of India versus China. And we need not align with groups like Quad and form such alliances, which might be misinterpreted by China. He says there is a need for India as well to reassure that we don't fall for Western narrative. We still retain our independent foreign policy. So maybe that reassurance from India could help, according to the writer, right? But the writer also misses a point, which I would like to bring up, that India was pushed towards the Quad and the Western narrative because of Chinese aggression repeatedly, right? Of course, India relies on US or Japan, Australia and others for possible diplomatic and maybe even some military support, at least with regard to supply of weapons in the Indo-Pacific, mainly to stand up against Chinese aggression. So probably if China never triggered India, maybe India would have still maintained that distance from the Western narrative, and we would have had an independent relationship with China. So that is one point I feel the writer is missing, but he does have a valid point that India shouldn't take any aggressive moves which could unnecessarily trigger China as well. So here the writer brings up a very interesting and a very valid point. He says that the narrative in the Indian media is extremely hostile, misinformed, and even bordering on the lines of fake news and misinformation. All you hear about China in the Indian media, especially electronic media, news channels, is that China is a superior enemy, an immediate threat, a bully, a villain, right? So this narrative is something that the writer has a problem with. Because this journalist, right, he has experience as a journalist as well. He has traveled to China, worked in China. He says that in China, even though the Chinese media is state-controlled, you don't see such kind of hatred being promoted against India. Though Chinese have a very poor understanding of India, they do have a racial discrimination against India. You don't at least see that kind of hatred and a smear campaign against India and Indians, as you see against the Chinese, against China in Indian media. Now, this has a lot to do with the political narrative as well, right? So the mixing of politics with the need to sensationalize news has in a way affected the perception of China in India, which in turn brings that pressure on the government to be seen as strong against China, to be seen as standing up to Chinese aggressive moves. So this is something which needs to be addressed on the Indian side. We need not fall for the Western narrative that China is a threat. As history shows, right? Historically, Indian and Chinese civilizations, the two largest, greatest, prosperous civilizations, have thrived together, worked together. So there's no reason why it can't happen in the modern world. As Manmohan Singh said, and I repeat the statement, the world is large enough to accommodate both India and China, the rise of India and China. They need not be at conflict. So this is largely a Western narrative. But again, don't forget, yes, China has been aggressive because it's largely presuming that India is aligning with US and the Quad and other threats, other hostile threats. So this is where the misconception has to be cleared from both the sides. The responsibility begins with China, as China is the prime instigator, the initial instigator. And India also has a responsibility to reassure China. So we need to focus on building our trade relations. When you look at our economic ties currently, there is a big problem. There's a huge trade deficit that goes against India. But the writer says this can be easily solved. The trade deficit can be plugged. If both countries have good relations, China can buy more products from India, increase India's exports to China to solve the trade deficit. Or, as a chief economic advisor recently suggested, China can bring in more FDI into the Indian market to balance the trade deficit. Because Indian companies, startups, they are craving for funds. And India presents a great growth opportunity. There's no reason why Chinese investments cannot flood the Indian market, right? So Chinese investors were looking at India as a big investment destination before 2020. But ever since the Galwan clashes and Ladakh standoff, the government has restricted Chinese FDI. That's why this year's economic survey, authored by the chief economic advisor, calls for normalization of India-China relations so that China can bring in more FDI into India, which is desperately needed to boost our industrial growth, to fund our startups, and even to contribute infrastructure development. So there are opportunities if both countries have the willingness to work together and solve the problems that they have. Another issue that writer points out correctly is the very poor people-to-people relations that we have, the cultural people-to-people relations. Especially on the Indian side, there is a lot of caution when it comes to issuing visas. We have a very strict visa immigration policy against the Chinese. We issued only 10,000 visas in the last year, whereas China has issued 2 lakh visas to Indians. So there is an enormous discrepancy here. A lot of Indian students, even tourists, businessmen, traders are going to China. 2 lakh visas were issued by the Chinese embassy to Indians, whereas just around 10,000 visas were given by India to the Chinese. So there's an opportunity here to boost tourism, to attract Chinese students, workers, traders, businessmen, and bring tourists as well, which can drive not only the economy and the bilateral economic ties, but also it can boost the cultural ties and people-to-people relations as well. So these suggestions being offered by the writer, I think is very insightful. It's a very different approach from what you see being followed in general. Now let's look at another important article on page 20. We have an update from the crisis in Syria. As all of you know, Syrian rebels led by groups, militias such as HTS, a radical jihadist outfit, they have toppled the Syrian regime of Bashar al-Assad, and now they are discussing the future of Syria. So there is a big update coming in. All the militias which were part of this rebellion, be it the HTS, Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, the jihadist outfit led by Muhammad al-Julani, along with other militias like the Syrian National Army and others, they've all come together for a conclave to decide the future. And they have said that all the armed militant groups, the terrorist outfits, they are going to disarm and dissolve. They're going to disarm, essentially surrender, lay down their arms and dissolve these militias. And they will be integrated into the Syrian Defense Forces or the Syrian Armed Forces. Essentially, the former rebels and militants, they are looking to enter mainstream politics and take over the reins of the future Syrian government. So this is a big development for different factions, different rebels with different ideologies to come together and agree that they are going to disarm and dissolve their militant terror organizations and come together to form a government, and these members will be integrated into the Syrian Defense Forces in the coming days. So this is a big breakthrough. So there is hope that maybe the future government will be able to stabilize the country and bring an end to all the violence and the tensions that are present here. But however, the leaders who were part of these meetings, all the militant leaders, the extremist leaders, the rebel groups, they have been very clear that they will not allow the Kurdish areas to retain any autonomy or demand any kind of independence. In northeast Syria, where the Syrian Kurds are present, Syrian Kurdish groups such as Syrian Democratic Forces, they previously had struck a deal with Assad's regime. They had been given some sort of limited autonomy, right? So the new regime which is taking over under al-Julani, they have made it clear that they will not allow any kind of autonomy or independence. They will not allow the breakup of the country. Syria will remain united, which means the Kurdish areas will remain a part of it. Now, related to the Kurds, there is another parallel development happening. Ever since Assad's regime fell, the Kurds in northeast Syria are under attack. They are being targeted. The Kurdish group, Syrian Democratic Forces, which includes Kurdish militants and armed groups such as YPG, they are under severe attack. Even several cities and towns are being captured in northeast Syria from the Kurds by the Syrian National Army, which is sponsored by Turkey. As we have discussed in previous sessions, Turkey has been the main player in this entire development. Turkey not only sponsored the HTS, supported this jihadist outfit, but it has also backed the Syrian National Army, which was previously the Free Syrian Army, essentially the Syrian rebels who were opposed to Assad's regime. So Turkey is using these proxies. It used HTS to bring down Assad's regime. It is using Syrian National Army primarily to target the Kurdish groups, because Kurdish militants are a threat for Turkey. In Turkey, there are Kurd groups, Kurd militants such as PKK, which attack Turkey, which are fighting for liberation. They want to integrate all the Kurd areas in Turkey, Syria, and neighboring Iran and Iraq to form Kurdistan, a separate independent nation. So that's a threat to Turkey's integrity and sovereignty. So Turkey is known to oppress and target the Kurds, and it has been using a proxy, the Free Syrian Rebels or Syrian National Army, to target the Kurdish areas and Syrian Democratic Forces. So this conflict is continuing. And don't forget, the US has a stake here. The US has been sponsoring the Syrian Democratic Forces, the Kurds, in order to target Islamic State, to keep pressure on ISIS in Syria. The USA has been funding the Kurd groups such as YPG and Syrian Democratic Forces, who have been fighting against ISIS modules and the terrorist sleeper cells of ISIS in Syria. So in a way, this becomes a face-off between Turkey and US as well. So that is something which is an ongoing development. So in northeast Syria, the conflict clashes continue between Kurds on one side, Syrian Democratic Forces on one side, and Syrian National Army, sponsored by Turkey, on the other side. Meanwhile, the other militant groups, the rebels, they've all come together and agreed to disarm and dissolve and merge with the defense forces and form a stable future government. So let's see how things will develop, whether these rebels and militants, will they live up to the promises they have made? What will happen to the Kurdish issue? Or how will be the face-off between US and Turkey in Syria? So we will get more updates in the coming days. Now let's proceed and take a quick look at the prelim section. Let's look at these prelims articles. On page 13, we have another important article for international relations and economy. World Bank has brought out crucial data related to global remittances. The World Bank has published important data related to global remittances. What are remittances, especially inward remittances? Inward remittances are nothing but the money which our diaspora is sending back to their families in our country. As you know, millions of Indians, they are residing abroad, studying, working abroad, right? India has one of the largest diaspora populations in the world. In almost every country, there is a strong Indian community. So the money that is sent back by the Indian community back to their families in India, this accounts for inward remittances. Similarly, you have outward remittances as well. That is the money that leaves India to other countries, right? So this data on global remittances is very insightful, especially with regard to inbound remittances, inward remittances. India again has come at the top position. For the last 3 years, India has been the world's highest recipient of remittances, and India accounts for 14.3% of the total global remittances received in the last year. In 2023-24, India remains right at the top. This has been the case since 2021. So for the last 3 years consecutively, India has been receiving the highest flow of remittances, and we are getting 14.3%. That is the share of India's remittances if you look at the total global remittances. The total amount received this year is at $129 billion, which is a massive sum of money. In fact, just for sake of comparison, if you look at India-China bilateral trade, even that is around $130 billion. So the equivalent of India-China trade relations, that is the amount of money that we are receiving from the Indian community, Indian diaspora. So this places India right at the top. Then after India, it is Mexico, then China. China's share in global remittances has been falling. It has been declining. In this year, China's share is just 5.3% out of the total global remittances. So at one point, both India and China were the leading countries getting the maximum remittances, especially from late 90s, early 2000 to until 2015 at least. China was at the top. China was ahead of India as well, right? Though both countries were registering phenomenal growth year on year with regard to the inbound remittances. At least until few years, China remained at the top, ahead of India as well. But of late, in the last few years, China has been seeing a decline. It has dropped to the third position. Its overall share has gone down to 5.3%. It's seeing a clear decline in the rate of inbound remittances. Now, the question is, why is it happening? UPSC might ask you, there might be a prelims question, why there has been a decline in inbound remittances to China in recent years? The answer is very simple. The aging population of China and the developed nature of Chinese economy. Both reasons are responsible. See, China's rapid growth has solved basic problems like poverty and socio-economic problems. So need for Chinese people to migrate to other countries has gone down. There's no need for Chinese to go out. They have enough opportunities in the country itself. Next, population is aging. People eventually are losing energy, interest to go out and work. Or those who are outside, the diaspora, they're coming back as they age, as they become old. They're coming back to their home country. So there has been a fall in China's diaspora population as well. So both the factors are responsible, right? Whereas India, on the other hand, we continue to enjoy the demographic dividend, a very young population, right? And we still have developmental problems. So those who aspire for better life, better standard of living, better education, better opportunities, they would like to go out of India. They don't like to stay back in India due to limited opportunities they get. So there is a lot of aspiration in India, not just amongst the well-educated and the upper middle classes, even amongst those who are not well-educated, right? Those who come from poorer backgrounds. There is a lot of aspiration to go abroad, work abroad. And this is what contributes to the significant jump in remittances that we are seeing. For 3 consecutive years, we've been getting more than $100 billion. Now, don't forget, this massive amount of money can help us bridge our current account deficit. Since India runs a deficit on the trade account, on the current account, if you look at the balance of payments, right, we end up importing much more than what we export. So there's always a huge trade imbalance. So we can bridge the current account deficit through these remittances which comes in. So that is something you need to understand. So can you find out which countries are the top 3 sources of remittances to India? This is a question for you. This is an exercise I'm giving for you. Can you find out the top 3 countries which are the biggest sources of remittances? Please mention that in the comments. Next, we have an article related to NHRC, National Human Rights Commission. Recently, the chairperson of NHRC was chosen by the selection committee. The name has been forwarded to the president for the appointment of the new chairperson of NHRC. So, former Supreme Court Judge V. Ramasubramaniam has been selected by the selection committee. So, this selection has triggered a political controversy. Congress leaders who were part of the selection committee have raised an objection. They have accused the government members who are part of the selection committee of being biased, of not considering the opinion, the views of the opposition leaders, and for violating the established due process. So because of this controversy, it's important to know what is NHRC, what does it do, right? What is its function, what is its composition, and how is the chairperson selected and appointed? So let's take a quick look. National Human Rights Commission is a statutory body. It was set up in 1993 under the Protection of Human Rights Act of 1993. So it has been given statutory status. So this helps India fulfill its international commitments and also constitutional commitments. Indian Constitution inherently upholds human rights, plus we have international commitments to uphold human rights. India is signatory to the Universal Declaration on Human Rights. We are signatory to many similar international covenants on civil and political rights. So in line with these commitments, India enacted the Protection of Human Rights Act, and NHRC was established in 1993 as a statutory body. Its primary role is to protect, uphold human rights, look at cases of human right violations in the country, take up suo motu cases as well, and ensure that India's international commitments, constitutional commitments are upheld and protected. It even submits a report to the President of India, right? So NHRC plays a key role, a key function as far as protection of human rights is concerned. If you look at the composition, it's headed by a chairperson, right, who's appointed by the President of India. The chairperson and members, they're all appointed by the President. So along with chairperson, there are 5 members, excluding the ex officio members. This is the composition. Please make a note. It's very important. The chairperson is always a former Chief Justice of India or a judge of the Supreme Court. This is a criteria which has been laid down. The practice is that either a former Chief Justice of India, former CJI, or a former judge of the Supreme Court is chosen to be appointed as a chairperson. Then there are 5 members. 1 member from either the Supreme Court of India, former judge of the Supreme Court, right, or a former Chief Justice of a High Court. One member has to be a former Judge of Supreme Court of India or a former Chief Justice of a High Court. Coming to the other three, apart from chairperson and this member, the other three members, they are experts in human rights. Those who have expertise, knowledge, prior experience in handling human rights, in protecting human rights. And the condition is that at least one of them should be a woman. Out of these three experts who are brought in from the outside, one of them at least should be a woman member. Now, who are the ex officio members? There are a number of ex officio members. The chairpersons of all the important national commissions, the chairpersons of important constitutional bodies, such as the National Commission for Scheduled Castes, Scheduled Tribes, the National Commission for Minorities, Backward Classes, the Commission on Protection of Child Rights. So the chairpersons of all these commissions are ex officio members. By virtue of holding these positions, they'll automatically become members of NHRC. This is the composition. Now, coming to the selection and appointment of the chairperson, as I said, appointment is done by the president. But there is a selection committee which selects the chairperson and recommends the name to the President of India. So, who are the members of the selection committee? Because it's important to maintain a balance here. There should be adequate representation for the government and the opposition, and for some neutral members as well. Because the NHRC, when it performs its role, essentially it will be working against the government. So it needs to be as independent as possible, right? Because human right violations largely occur through the government itself, through police or security forces, or through government policies or decisions. So to ensure the independence of the NHRC and its chairperson, there is a selection committee that includes the Prime Minister and Home Minister. Obviously, PM is the chairperson of the selection committee. So they represent the government. The leader of opposition, both in Lok Sabha, Rajya Sabha, they represent the opposition. And the Speaker of Lok Sabha and Deputy Chairman of Rajya Sabha, who are considered to be or expected to be neutral, given their role as Speaker and Deputy Chairman in both the houses. Now, the argument by the opposition is that the Congress leaders, right, who hold the position in Lok Sabha and Rajya Sabha as opposition leaders, they are arguing that within the selection committee, there was a neglect of the views of the opposition. The Prime Minister and Home Minister allegedly ignored the views and advice. And the Speaker of Lok Sabha and Deputy Chairman of Rajya Sabha, who are eventually backed by the ruling party, they have favored the government, and which has led to the selection of V. Ramasubramanian. Opposition parties had raised an objection against his appointment. Right? They had recommended other names, but it had been sidelined. So that's why they have raised this controversy, and it has turned into a political issue. So please understand the role, composition, and the appointment of the chairperson of NHRC. Coming to the next topic, the Rooppur nuclear project. Bangladesh is building its first nuclear plant at Rooppur. The nuclear power plant at Rooppur, this is an ongoing project since 2011. The idea was proposed back in 2011, but in 2018, to realize this project, a trilateral agreement was signed, a tripartite agreement, where Russia would be supporting the project. Russia would carry out the construction, bring in the nuclear reactor, the technology and the nuclear material to help Bangladesh set up its first ever nuclear power plant. And India was also a part of the initiative, still remains a part of the initiative. India would assist Bangladesh in ensuring the safety of the plant, in assisting in the construction, right, working with Russia. See, India cannot transfer nuclear material or nuclear technology because we are still not member of Nuclear Suppliers Group. Since India has not signed non-proliferation treaty, right, we have not been able to join Nuclear Suppliers Group, which is an export control regime. So without being a member of NSG, India is prohibited from exporting nuclear material, nuclear technology to others, right? Because that would amount for nuclear proliferation, for leaking, spreading nuclear technology and material to others. So India can't provide the critical technology and material. So Russia is doing that. Russia is providing the nuclear reactor, the material and the technology, and even constructing the plant. A Russian company, Rosatom, right, which is part of the Russian state, is executing the critical Rooppur nuclear project. So India was providing the other assistance needed to ensure the safe design of the plant, the construction of the plant, anything apart from the nuclear related materials and technology, India was assisting Bangladesh. Now, this was seen as a strategic project where India and Russia were working together to help Bangladesh in the nuclear domain. So this agreement was signed obviously when Sheikh Hasina was the leader, who was seen as pro-India. But now things are starting to change. Following the removal of Sheikh Hasina and the emergence of strong anti-India sentiments, we are seeing the rise of sentiments against the Rooppur nuclear plant as well. Recently, the Anti-Corruption Commission of Bangladesh, it has alleged that Sheikh Hasina was involved in corruption, bribery, money laundering, and part of the black money allegedly that Sheikh Hasina raised was from the Rooppur nuclear project. Essentially, the new dispensation in Bangladesh, the Anti-Corruption Commission, is alleging that maybe there was a corrupt deal involving the Russian company and the then Sheikh Hasina government. So Rosatom has denied these allegations. Rosatom has strongly denied these allegations, and suspicion is rising both in India and Russia whether there is a deliberate attempt to sideline India and Russia. Because these developments are coming after US National Security Advisor met the current interim leader of Bangladesh, Mohammad Yunus. It appears that US-Bangladesh relations are growing. Parallelly, Bangladesh-Russia relations are taking a hit, which is quite unusual. Historically, Bangladesh has maintained a good relationship with both US and Russia, just like India has. So along with rise of anti-India sentiments, we are potentially seeing a rise of anti-Russia sentiments, where the government is inclined to sabotage a strategic project such as the Rooppur nuclear project. And this comes at a time when US-Bangla relations are improving, right? So there is a lot of suspicion in the strategic circles that is there a bigger conspiracy to turn Bangladesh against not just India, but against Russian interests as well. So Rooppur project is crucial to that. We still have a tripartite agreement. So we need to wait and watch how Bangladesh will handle this, how India, Russia will respond to this. Coming to the last topic for today, on the supplementary page where science and tech articles are given on page 2, the Hindu carries this spectacular image of a volcanic eruption, a major volcanic eruption at the Kilauea volcano in Hawaii. So please mark the location where this volcanic eruption has occurred. It has occurred in the Hawaiian Islands of United States, where in the main island of Hawaii, there is an active shield volcano. It's a shield volcano, a well-known active volcano, Kilauea. So just mark the name, the type of volcano it is. Read more about shield volcanoes. Get your concepts right. So from geography, try to understand what is a shield volcano. That's another exercise I'm giving you. So please be aware of this, because any such recent eruptions can come as a prelims question, a geography question, or a map-based question. So this volcano, which is active, it's a shield volcano. It's located in the Hawaiian Islands of United States. So this brings my detailed analysis of today's The Hindu to an end. Now, before we end the class, let's look at some questions and doubts. Let me know whatever questions and doubts you have. And if you want the PDF of this session, do join my Telegram channel, scan the QR code. In some time, I'll upload the PDF. And also join our official Telegram channel, because we conduct a daily quiz on these topics. So you can practice these articles, revise them, prepare for the upcoming exam. So the link for our official Telegram channel is in the link. The link is in the video description. And let me know whatever doubts, whatever questions you have. Let's try to take up a few doubts and questions for a few minutes. Then we can wrap up the session. Any specific questions related to the topics we have covered? Okay. I'm not seeing any questions over here. Can we scroll up? Great. If you have understood everything, I'm more than happy. And if you did benefit from the session, please let me know. Press the like button, share your comments. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel. That is it. Thanks for watching. We'll see you tomorrow.